So starting straight off with objection 1, you'll see I did a little bit of highlighting there for you to be able to very, very clearly see what I'm pointing at. Objection 1 reads as follows. Any illiterate peasant can talk perfectly well about his after images, or how things look or feel to him, or about his aches and pains, and yet he may know nothing whatever about neurophysiology. A man may, like Aristotle, believe that the brain is an organ for cooling the body without any impairment of his ability to make true statements about his sensations. Hence, the things we are talking about when we describe our sensations cannot be processes in the brain. The major element he's talking about here is that the idea that people can talk about and know things about sensations without talking about and knowing things about brain processes. So, by extension, he feels that sensations must not be brain processes if we know things about one without knowing things about the other. So he thinks if we're saying there's strict identity, then that strict identity must mean we know the same amount of things about the two elements, so the sensations and the brain processes. This is now Smart's reply. So you see it's from this arrow downwards. So you might as well say that a nation of slugabeds who never saw the morning star or knew of its existence, or who had never thought of the expression the morning star, but who used the expression the evening star perfectly well, could not use this expression to refer to the same entity as we refer to and describe as the morning star. You may object that the morning star is, in a sense, not the very same thing as the evening star, but only something spatio-temporarily continuous with it. That is, you may say that the morning star is not the evening star, in the strict sense of identity that I distinguished earlier. I can perhaps forestall this objection by considering the slugabeds to be New Zealanders and the early risers to be Englishmen. Then the thing the New Zealanders describe as the morning star could be the very same thing, in a strict sense, as the Englishmen describe as the evening star, and yet they could be ignorant of this fact. There is, however, a more plausible example. Consider lightning. Modern physical science tells us that lightning is a certain kind of electrical discharge due to ionization of clouds of water vapor in the atmosphere. This is, it is now believed, is what the true nature of lightning is. Note that there are not two things, a flash of lightning and electrical discharge. There is one thing, a flash of lightning, which is described scientifically as an electrical discharge to the earth from a cloud of ionized water molecules. The case is not at all like that of explaining a footprint by reference to a burglar. We say that what lightning really is, what its true nature as revealed by science is an electrical discharge. It is not the true nature of a footprint to be a burglar. To forestall irrelevant objections, I shall like to make it clear that by lightning I mean the publicly observable physical object, lightning, not a visual sense datum of lightning. I say that the publicly observable physical object lightning is in fact the electrical discharge, not just a correlate of it. The sense datum, or at least the having of a sense datum, so the look of lightning, may well in my view be a correlate of the electrical discharge, for in my view it is the brain state caused by the lightning, but we should no more confuse sensations of lightning with lightning than we confuse sensations of a table with the table. In short, the reply to objection 1 is that there can be contingent statements of the form A is identical with B, and a person may well know that something is an A without knowing that it is a B. An illiterate peasant might well be able to talk about his sensations without knowing about his brain processes, just as he can talk about lightning though he knows nothing of electricity. So the important element here is the two examples he brings in. So obviously this is pretty long, despite the fact that he gives a bit of a summary at the very end. But one thing you have to note is you'll see here, all of this element is about the morning star. So it's talking about this idea that because these two different sets of people on other sides of the world are seeing the same thing, but they're calling it different terminology, doesn't imply that it's not the same thing. So just because they're using different wording or explaining it in a different way doesn't necessarily mean that they're not the same thing. So the point of bringing in this example is saying that just because they're ignorant of the fact that they're talking about the same thing doesn't mean that they aren't the same thing. That's really just the main point of the morning star versus the evening star. The second part of this is then what we see from around here downwards. So all of this lightning stuff, which we see continues on the next page, pretty much relates to the idea that people can seem to know things about lightning without knowing the very specific scientific details of what lightning is, which is this electrical discharge due to ionization of clouds of water vapor. So this section here, the due to ionization of clouds and water vapor in the atmosphere. So just because we don't have all of the information, all of the understanding of what that is, doesn't mean that we don't know that, like, what lightning really is, or that we can't talk about lightning. So the key part to do with the lightning example definitely comes in at the very, very end, just makes it as clear as possible, when he says, an illiterate peasant might well be able to talk about his sensations without knowing about his brain processes. So obviously that's talking very clearly about the objection, and he's then bringing in his example of the lightning, just as he can talk about lightning though he knows nothing about electricity. So again, we don't have to have the scientific understanding of something to have an understanding of it, or of an element that is identical with what we are talking about, which in this case is lightning is electrical discharge. So we can know things about lightning without knowing things about electrical discharge, without that meaning that they are not the same thing. Cool. All right, so moving on to objection 2. Objection 2 reads as follows. It is only a contingent fact, if it is a fact, that when we have a certain kind of sensation, there is a certain kind of process in our brain. Indeed, it is possible, though perhaps in the highest degree unlikely, that our present physiological theories will be as out of date as the ancient theory connecting mental processes with goings on in the heart. It follows that when we report a sensation, we are not reporting a brain process. So what the argument being put forward by this objection is that sensations cannot be identical to brain processes, as they could turn out to be falsely seen as related. So if we remember from class, we talked about this as the idea of the contingent fact, or the contingent truth. So something that, depending on the context, depending on the knowledge we have, a claim that could turn out to be false. So isn't necessarily always true. There can be times where it can turn out to be false. So what the objection smart is saying, maybe put forward, is that there could be elements of our current physical theories of the world, or physiological theories, which turn out to be false, and thus, because they are false, sensations could be seen as not identical as brain processes, because they're falsely related. So the next part is his reply to this second objection. So it reads as follows. The objection certainly proves that when we say I have an afterimage, we cannot mean something of the form I have such and such a brain process. But this does not show that what we report, having an afterimage, is not in fact a brain process. I see lightning does not mean I see an electrical discharge. Indeed, it is logically possible, though highly unlikely, that the electrical discharge account of lightning might one day be given up. Again, I see the evening star does not mean the same as I see the morning star, and yet the evening star and the morning star are one and the same thing, is a contingent proposition. Possibly objection 2 derives some of its apparent strength from the Fido theory of meaning. If the meaning of an expression were what the expression named, then of course it would follow from the fact that sensation and brain processes have different meaning that they cannot name one and the same thing. Smart's reply comes in essentially 2 parts. So the first part being that he thinks that objection 2 does not show that what we report, so the sensation, is not in fact a brain process. And he relates back to the idea of semantic versus ontological identity that we talked about before. So he agrees that when we report on a sensation, we do not mean the same thing as a report on a brain process. But that does not show that, in fact, the sensation is not a brain process. The same can be said for lightning and electricity, or for the morning and evening star. That is, the meaning of an expression is not the same as what it names. The second part relates to what he calls, what he refers to as Fido, so Fido theory of meaning. This is the idea that the word means the thing that it stands for. So it's called Fido theory because Fido refers to a particular dog. And so Fido has meaning because it's applied directly to my dog Fido, such that there is a direct match between the two. If the meaning of an expression were always what it named, then sure, it would follow that sensation and brain process would be different things. But when I say I have an after image, I do not mean I have such and such brain process, and yet it still may be a brain process. The two expressions can refer to the same thing, even if they're named in different ways or expressed in different ways. So whilst a sensation is expressed in terms of what we are seeing or how we are feeling a certain thing, the reason why we are seeing those certain things or why we are feeling those certain things comes down to our brain process, or whatever brain process is going on at the time. So the sensation, the way we express it, is different than the way we express our brain process. And what Smart is saying is that just because they're expressed differently doesn't mean that they don't refer to the same thing. And this is how he's objecting to, or how he's replying to objection 2. All right, objection 4 is pretty short in the reading. So it specifically is just written as the after image is not in physical space, the brain process is. So the after image is not a brain process. So this can be put really simply as the idea that so after images are not in physical space, brain processes are in physical space, and therefore an after image is not a brain process. That's the very simple version of what they're arguing here. So after image, not in physical space, brain process is in physical space, therefore they can't be the same thing because they don't share this physical space. So the reply here is as follows. This is an ignoratio elenchi. I am not arguing that the after image is a brain process, but the experience of having an after image is a brain process. It is the experience which is reported in the introspective report. Similarly, if it is objected that the after image is yellowy orange, but that a surgeon looking into your brain would see nothing yellowy orange, my reply is that it is the experience of seeing yellowy orange that is being described, and the experience is not a yellowy orange something. So, to say that a brain process cannot be yellowy orange is not to say that a brain process cannot in fact be the experience of having a yellowy orange after image. There is, in a sense, no such thing as an after image or a sense datum, though there is such a thing as an experience of having an image, and this experience is described indirectly in material object language, not in phenomenal language, for there is no such thing. We describe the experience by saying, in effect, that it is like the experience we have when, for example, we see a yellowy orange patch on the wall. Trees and wallpaper can be green, but not the experience of seeing or imagining a tree or a wallpaper. Or, if they are described as green or yellow, this can only be in a derived sense. So something to note here is that sense datum, so it's just like a plural of sense data. What they're talking about is the sense impression, so what's immediately obvious or perceivable in an experience. It's not talking about the material object itself, just the qualities, whatever the sense experience or whatever is. To do with this reply, one of the major elements you have to understand is what the ignoratio elenchi is. So if we remember from class, we talked about this idea of a logical fallacy in which you're refuting an opponent while actually disproving something that they haven't actually said. So you're saying that the conclusion drawn is irrelevant because you're actually just disproving something they haven't actually put forward. So why Smart is bringing this up is because he's not arguing that after images themselves are brain processes, but that the experience of having an after image is a brain process. So the element you want to look at is he says that it is our experience of having an after image that is a brain process. And this brain process isn't necessarily yellowy orange, so this kind of part here. So if it is objected that the after image is yellowy orange, but the surgeon looking at your brain would see nothing yellowy orange, then it's again relating to something that he hasn't put forward. He hasn't said that the after image itself is the same thing as the brain process. He says the fact that we're having an after image, the experience of having an after image, comes about because of a brain process. So the sensation is a brain process. So you'll see if we go down to this part, again, even those first two lines there, it is the experience of seeing yellowy orange that is being described, and this experience is not a yellowy orange something. So the experience itself, the actual fact of having the sensation, does not itself have to be yellowy orange, even if what we're describing is yellow orange. It is the experience of seeing this that is being described when we use color, but the brain process itself is not a yellowy orange thing and does not have to be a yellowy orange thing to be said to be identical to the sensation itself. Because remember, it's the process or the concept of having a sensation, not what the actual sensation itself is. That is the element of strict identity. Cool. So I'll make this into two parts. So this will be the first three that we went over in our first lesson, and then I'm going to make another one with the other three parts. So we'll leave it here for this one.